in Northern Australia. He's the NT Northern Australian Development Office General Manager, so different to the Office of Northern Australia. He's going to tell you all about it. Something you might not know about Luke is in WA we have a big kayak event. It's 124 k's called the Avon Descent. You've got to be mad to go in it. This guy did it in 1988. I didn't even think he was born. Look at him. He's so gorgeous looking. But he did that in a surf ski, of all things. So please join me in welcoming Luke to the stage.
Thanks, Catherine. That was, didn't need to do that, but anyway. Righto, well, there's a few people still outside. I'm not going to stand behind this podium because I tend to get lost. So I'm going to walk around a little bit, so excuse me if you find that uncomfortable. But first of all, I just wanted to acknowledge the NFF and Tony, Ma and Fiona, who's not there right now. I know you've been sitting together down the front, but she's probably out the back doing something. But I just want to acknowledge what you're doing, and I think the profile of the NFF is really, really moving ahead. So congratulations to your team as well for what you've organised here. So well done, and I've really enjoyed it so far. And also the $1 billion by 2030. Territorians in the room, I just want to acknowledge those, and also the leaders of the northern cattle industry, many who are in this room. I just want to acknowledge you as well and pay my respects to you as the leaders that you are and the industries and the economic development that you're creating for Australia and the north of Australia. But I'm going to move fairly quickly. Now, originally I was going to do this in 15 minutes, and there's been a negotiation around that, and I'm going to do it in 25, but I'm going to get a bell at half time. But I'm going to move fairly quickly. So just a quick bit of background. I'm originally out of Western Australia, and there's a fairly close relative of mine sitting in the room, and the genetics in these sheep have got something to do with him. But I'll leave that for now. But I've done a bit of a circuit, and I've ended up in Northern Australia in the cattle industry. Now, that's a picture from the old days, but for those of you that don't know, we think the north of Australia, and particularly Darwin, as the pointy end, is very much the spearhead of our engagement in the region for a whole range of reasons. It's a place of some sort of mystery for a lot of people because a lot of Australians have never been there. But it is an amazing part of the world. And it's a part of the world that has, I think, probably the only integrated supply chain, value-adding supply chain with livestock that I'm aware of the nature and the size of it, where we breed cattle and we finish them in Indonesia. We breed, they feed, and work on those competencies. So it's a very sophisticated system, which I think a lot of people are probably well aware of, which was called into threat in 2011. Anyway, Northern Australia, half of the country, 65%, or 60% of our exports, 5% of the population. So I don't know what the rest of you are doing, but you need to do more. So that's Northern Australia, and believe it or not, there's only 13 politicians federally representing the north of Australia, but I'll progress. Very, very quickly, unless you weren't aware, most people see the front page of the NT News every day. This is a few more pages inside the NT News. There's a fish swimming around in the Northern Territory with a tag in it that's worth $1 million if you catch that fish. That bloke there on the screen, there he is, on the screen. Whoops, hang on a sec, I did that what I was told not to do. This guy just caught a $10,000 fish the other day. Anyway, there's quite a few $10,000 fish swimming around. That guy's already caught one. Anyhow, I'll move on. So what I want to talk about is agriculture, prosperity, national prosperity, Northern Australia, and I'm also going to talk about some internal and external challenges that we have in our positioning for the prosperity of agriculture nationally. So let's get on the road. That's the Barkly Tableland, a natural plain that covers many hundreds of thousands of square kilometres in the Northern Territory. So Fiona Simpson, in the announcing of the 2030 plan, said that agriculture is a key to Australia's future prosperity. And as we know, it has been part of our national prosperity historically as well. Now, we know that there's roughly about a 60-40 rule. We produce about enough food for about 80,000 people. We feed ourselves and we export the rest. We're moving from $63 billion worth of farm gate value to $100 billion. Well, let's assume that unless we have some sort of population explosion, we're going to have to sell most of that to somebody else. And if we look at who we're selling our agricultural produce to right now, it is very much dominated by the countries to our north, with the exception of the US, very much dominated by the countries to our north with China, Japan, the Republic of Indonesia. And in fact, our prosperity as a nation has been fundamentally tied to the rise of Japan, Korea, and now China. So where's the next $40 billion worth of produce going to go? That's all right, the Chinese will probably buy it. Will they? I don't know. Possibly not. Now, another factor that is part of our cost of production and our production is the fuel and the things that go into producing our farm products. Now, did anybody know that we've only got 25 days of fuel in this country? It's an on-time delivery system we currently run. That fuel comes from countries that are in our near region, and most of that fuel comes through the Malacca Straits and the South China Sea. We do not refine much here anymore, so we import it all. On-time delivery. Now, you can see the categories of those products there and how much of each there are, but if you're running diesel, you know you've only got a couple of weeks' supply if something goes wrong. Now, if we look at the investment profile of our nation, a lot of our investment is reasonably well spread. It's very different to where our exports are going, but our investment is reasonably well spread. And we see less of a dominance with Asia, but more with Europe and America. The other fundamental input into our system, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is photosynthesis. We are a renewable industry. The oldest renewable industry in the world, the largest renewable industry in the world. I don't hear anybody talking about it. Carbon dioxide, the magic of photosynthesis, creating something out of gas and air. Carbon dioxide, got plenty of it. We've got a fair bit of water, and we've got loads of sunlight. What a magical thing. But fundamentally, our prosperity is tied to our capacity to trade. And trade is both ways. That is where our prosperity in the future lies, and that's where our prosperity in the past has lied. And that region that we talked about where we sell most of our stuff is a region in rapid change. Half the world's population live to our north. And in my case, living in Darwin, it's a couple hundred nautical miles from Indonesia, a country of 280 million people. So this is where the action is emerging. But the action was there quite a long time ago. 2,000 years ago, the world's dominant powers, dominant economies were China and India, until the Industrial Revolution when that all changed. But we see the re-emergence of China and India and a whole range of other countries, and countries like Indonesia to our immediate north, which will be a $1 trillion economy very soon. It will surpass Australia's economy in size very quickly. Australia will decline in relative terms in our region from probably 13th or so in the OECD to about beyond 20 somewhere in the next 20 years. And the Chinese posture in the region is about trade links, it's about securing the trade, the systems for trade, the influence. It's no different to the old Silk Road that they ran a long time ago. It's no different. This is the modern Silk Road. It's about energy, it's about transport. We can put a container on a ship on the east coast of China and have it in Germany within days without changing carriages. And if we look out a little bit further, where is all the trade happening? It is happening in our region. This is container transport, and this is out at 2030. Now, these give you an indication, the size of that colour tells you how much trade is moving. Where's that moving? It's moving in our region. That's where our oil and gas comes from, our oil comes from to feed our industries. It comes through the Malacca Straits, the South China Sea. This is where the action is. This is where increasing the action is going to be in the future. Now, I'm just going to stop for a minute and we'll read this. In the beginning, there were two nations. And we're just going to reflect for a bit. One was a vast, mighty, and magnificent empire, brilliantly organised and culturally united, with dominated a massive swathe of the earth. You can probably all read better than me. You're well ahead of me. The other was an undeveloped, semi-feudal realm driven by religious factionalism and barely able to feed its illiterate, diseased and stinking masses. Can anybody tell me which that first country is? No? The second country? China. First country is India, second China is England. Now that's pre-industrial revolution. Our world view of what the world looks like is very recent. China and India were the largest economies in the world from the time of Christ through to the industrial revolution. They were salvaged and savaged and dug up and moved off somewhere else to feed the industrial revolution, as were parts of South America and Africa. Our worldview is very different. We come into this region often with a superior sort of attitude. I've seen it in Indonesia with a culturally dominant sort of attitude in our trade and engagement often in our region. This is the history. Our perception of history is very recent. And this affects our trading relationships. So what's the stage we're at in our region? And why I talk about this is I live at the pointy end of the spear in Darwin, in the north of northern Australia. The Japanese thought it was very, very strategic back in 1942. In fact, about 60 times they thought it was very strategic, as they did other places in northern Australia. Peace, Americana, Pax Americana. The world order is changing. The rules-based order is changing. We're going to see probably one of the biggest changes that's going to take place. It's unfolding now. Some would say that there's an economic cycle that we are now in the winter. We're entering the winter. Now, a lot of people are talking about some things that are coming over the horizon, but that we are entering a new phase economically, and things are going to become more difficult. We are certainly entering a new phase in our relations, the geopolitical arrangements in our region, the posture and positioning of China, America exiting from the policeman role that it's been holding since the Second World War. What's that going to do? The retreat into isolationism, the retreat into trade wars and protectionism. What's that mean? So a quick reflection. I was born in 1964, and in 1964, this guy was the head of the bad guys. His name is Leonid Brezhnev. He was the head of the Soviet Union. And the world was pretty simple then. There was two camps. There was the good guys and the bad guys. And this guy was leading the bad guys, the communist world. And it was a pretty scary time in the Cold War. It's interesting, isn't it, that Russia disappeared off the scene, but we're seeing it come back again. Can anybody tell me how big Russia's economy is in relation to the Australian economy? Anybody? About the same. Who would believe that normally? When I sort of discovered this not that long ago, I thought that can't be right. It is. It's true. Russia postures very differently to what you would think it would as a country of its size. And so, not saying that we should posture the same way as Russia, but it's an indication of what is possible if you've got the balls. However, going back to the world order and what's going on in our region, this gentleman here has unprecedented power. He is consolidating power in China like no other leader has in the past. And China is a major influence in the world going forward. And we are tied at the hip to China. Our economic relationship and our strategic relationship with China, we walk that line, as a lot of other countries do. The ASEAN countries in our region, the US. So that's halfway. And then enter the New World Order, Pax Americana, the policeman role, the world order, trade, the small actors in the region that are upsetting the balance and breeding anxiety in the region more generally. International terrorism. Someone with a machete and a mobile phone can create as much fear and disruption as somebody from a major power in many cases. Upset things, upend things. So we're in a very different time, a very different era. Terrorism is close. How we reach out and how we manage it more broadly. This photo's a bit out of date, I'm sorry about that. But how we manage our relationships in the region fundamentally will determine how we prosper in the future. As a middle power, as a country of 25 million people, in a region where that's probably a city, we seem to think that we're really important. We think that we have the right to everything that's out there. People should love us. People should love our stuff that we produce, love our meat, our milk. It's great. Well, quite frankly, a lot of people don't even know exist. We produce enough food to feed a couple of cities overseas. So really, and I know Darryl Quinlivan mentioned this morning, really we don't matter. A lot of our mattering is in our minds. So our future is about making sure that we do position ourselves so people take notice and the world takes notice. So sorry about that old photo. So what I'm saying is that, and you might be wondering why the hell I'm talking about this, but I'm going to hopefully come back to the point where I started, is our future prosperity is entirely dependent on a stronger, more confident and secure Australia. Because you cannot decouple our trade relationships, our strategic relationships, our political relationships. Ultimately, you will not be able to uncouple them. And if we see the disintegration of the order that we have experienced for the last 70 years in this region, things are going to get tougher. And us as a middle power are going to find it tougher. When the shit hits the fan and everybody starts bluing and everybody starts retreating inside their own tent, in their own camp and putting the barriers up, how are we going to fare? We are a net exporter. We don't export, we die. The other $40 billion worth of exports that we want to produce here have to go somewhere. We've got to send them somewhere. We've got to diversify our base of where we send them and what relationships we cultivate. So it's also, our prosperity is also intrinsically linked with a stronger and more capable and secure north. The north of Australia, 1 million people thereabouts, half the country's landmass. Within Asia, effectively a region of billions with 20-odd million below it. The future security and prosperity of this country is intrinsically linked to the security, prosperity and capability of Northern Australia and the entire region. A more secure, more prosperous region, Indonesia, Philippines, the ASEAN countries, is going to be good for us. How do we do that though? How do we force that? Australia is going to have to do more. Let's face it, Australia will have to do more if we are going to be part of a prosperous future for Australians, a higher cost of production, a higher standard of living. Australia will have to do more. And what is more? Now, I absolutely despair of this discussion. You see it on social media. Why are you giving all this money to these Muslims and these people in the Pacific? Stop this aid program. We should be giving it all to our farmers for drought. Well, fantastic. That's a very, very shallow understanding of what's going on. So in our region, I'm sure we've all been aware, these are all the countries that make up the Pacific region: China, Japan. This is where the world is fighting over control or fighting over influence. And if Australia's not in that scene, and now Australia's starting to re-inject itself into the Pacific, but if we're not in that scene, if we're not supporting the countries in our near region, it will not be good for us. We are part of a community which is arguably under a certain amount of threat if some of the world-based order starts to disintegrate. So it's about our soft power. And our soft power is what we do with those countries to support them and support their aspirations so they prosper, so that they don't disintegrate and threaten our region, so that we can trade with them both ways. And it's also about hard power. And believe it or not, the soft power, and I'll acknowledge Ashley Manakaris, who's just flown straight in from Indonesia, where the NTCA has been running for a number of years a program which is an ultimate example of soft power, where Indonesians and Australians exchange cultural understanding, work with each other in both countries. It's a powerful program that transcends politics, transcends national agendas at times, and we have good examples of where, during phone tapping things and all the rest of it, it's been the reason why ministers have come out of their hole and met with Australians because of programs like this. So it's about soft power, but it's also about the hard power and the way Australia positions itself in the region. Now, you might say, why the hell am I talking about this? What's this got to do with us? Well, the Australian government ultimately makes a lot of decisions about this, and it's influenced by people in this room that say, you need to be paying attention to this, because our future is absolutely pinned at the hip to the security, the strength and the posture of Australia in this region, a region that is growing, becoming more anxious and more potentially becoming more difficult, also in difficult economic times. 5 minutes. Actually, I think I'm ahead of time. Now that map, I know everybody's seen that map, but you notice that Darwin is in the centre of the earth. See that all those rings? Well, it's good reason for that, because we think it is. The point is that our place in the world is not guaranteed. We want to be prosperous. Well, we're going to have to fight for it. We're going to have to assert ourselves, and we're going to have to work and invest in our position in this region and in fact the world if we think that we have a right to be prosperous and have a future for agriculture. So there you go. That's a little bit of a view. Now, why am I talking about that? Well, I live in Northern Australia, and Northern Australia is where we engage with the region economically, strategically, diplomatically in many cases. So it means a lot to me. And I know that there's a lot of cattle producers in this room who understand what Northern Australia and our near neighbours means, those relationships with countries like Indonesia that can be thrown down the toilet with the stroke of a pen. Which brings me to some internal forces. Stroke of a pen. Right. Anybody know who that bloke is? Don Eatley. You know? No idea. No? Anybody? Joe Ludwig. Very good. Thanks, Fiona. So I heard for the very first time in my life the word social licence from none other than the Honourable Senator Joe Ludwig. Joe Ludwig said, you know that in 1880s cocaine was legal, and that industry should have had a plan to build social licence because it got taken away from them because people decided that it was an illegal thing and they lost the legal right to conduct their business. Thanks, Joe, that was really good. So you think that's pretty similar to the live export trade, do you, mate? Anyway, that was Joe Ludwig, and I'm sure plenty of people in this room that spent lots of time with Joe Ludwig would have equal anecdotes to share. Social licence, that was the first time I heard it. Now, it's all about Middle Australia supporting what you do. Yes, I understand that. I've never heard a word for it before, but we understood what it meant. But it's everyday language now, and it's been used here over and over again. So I don't think we've lost our social licence. Farmers still are quite well accepted, but the veneer is very thin. The drought is a good example. People are very supportive of supporting farmers. There's still some value there in supporting our farmers. So we shouldn't assume that there is no social licence more generally. But the veneer is thin because most Australians, as some of this research has presented today, don't actually understand much about it. And when the push comes to shove, they actually don't know anything, so they've got nothing to stand on. So we need to work at it. But what really frustrates me is we have a renewable industry that we don't talk about. The magic of photosynthesis, pretty much everything we do revolves around sunshine, carbon dioxide and water. It's a renewable industry, for Christ's sake. Now, if you're an accountant and you presented the cattle emissions equation, which was everything that goes up, you would be run out of town because there's an equation here. There's what goes in as well. It's the carbon cycle. So my plea to you is let's tell that story a little bit more because it frustrates the shit out of me when we get Richard Branson, who is a prolific emitter, who has his planes flying around the country full of the new generation who preach to us about conserving the planet and saving the planet. They have made consumption an Olympic sport. These are people who buy clothes and throw them out the next day, made out of synthetic products, fibres that go down the drain and choke up the bloody waterways, you name it. Yet he will preach to us and say, I'm not going to have beef in my aeroplanes because they are ecologically unsustainable, those terrible cattle of yours. Anyway, I think we've got some work to do, but we're coming from behind the eight ball. Anyway, that's a little rant there about old mate, but it's very frustrating. Anyway, so let's return to our prosperity. Our prosperity is going to be encapsulated in premium products, arguably. How do we differentiate? How do we sell another $40 billion worth of produce and give us the standard of living that we expect to adopt the ag tech and all the things that we need to do along the way? That's from China. That was out of a magazine in China, an aircraft magazine, a New Zealand milk company, I think. But the message is, this is not an escort agency ad, New Zealand escort agency ad. The message here is premium products, land with a bit more. And we all know, I think, that we're doing that and we're doing it quite well. We need to do more of it. 1 minute to go. But in reality, we are going to have to work differently. We're going to have to form new relationships and alliances, be comfortable be comfortable doing new things, making new relationships. Because the National Farm, that guy there, right? That guy there. Anybody tell me that is? That's Rowan Sullivan. He is the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association delegate on the National Farmers Federation. He's having a snooze, right? Well, poor bugger's probably been up since 4 o'clock in the morning, so you can't. But we cannot rest and think that the world will be okay if we don't position ourselves as a nation and fight for it and invest in it. Our prosperity will not be guaranteed unless we do this really smart. And we put pressure on those who make decisions about how we do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luke Bowen, always an entertaining speaker. And what I like about Luke's presentations is he actually makes you think. He's a very big out-of-the-box thinker. Some of the things that I think he's made me reflect on in that presentation just there, coming from Northern Australia, I will reiterate this, 60% of the exports of Australia come from 5% of the population. It's a bit cheeky, but little Northern Australian plug there. A couple of the other things, so relationships in the region are very important, and I don't think that we can underestimate the role that Australia plays in keeping that region peaceful. And Luke, in his role, as well as the Office of Northern Australia and a whole heap of other different initiatives, are working really hard in Northern Australia to do that. We are at a time when big powers are retreating. So our major markets, China, America, those sorts of things, they're closing their borders, and we need to be strategic in how we're going to actually address that. Reflecting on Daryl Quinlivan's presentation earlier this morning, we've been living on the back of high commodity prices. How are we going to handle our industry moving forward if those decrease in any way? And how do we secure the region? Northern Australia is very strategically located, and soft diplomacy is something that's really important. So the NTCA runs a cattle program. They've run it now for 3 or 4 or 5 years, where they send pastoralists over to Indonesia to sort of learn about that industry, but more importantly, get Indonesians to come back and do work placements on Australian stations. And I've spoken and worked in Indonesia with these people, and it is such an amazing thing. And like Luke says, it transcends politics. So everything's gone to custard with phone tapping or whatever, but that program still exists and still is celebrated. So it's a really, really wonderful thing. And Luke spoke also about social licence. We've got a whole panel on that tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to sharing people's thoughts on that.